like this. About a year ago, I was fortunate enough to attend a training and meet Rachelle. She's with the Arizona Attorney General's office, and she had this program ready to go for human trafficking, and we've been trying to look for a venue to get it started. Well, that movie kind of got some interest going, and you guys' phone call came in. I said, I know exactly who to call, so no further information from me. Here's Rachelle Lumpp from the Arizona Attorney General's office.
Thank you. So can you guys hear me okay? Is there feedback? Okay, great. So again, my name is Rachelle Lumpp. I'm with the Arizona Attorney General's office, and I work in the community outreach and education section there. And what we do as a team is we go out into the public all across the state of Arizona, and we educate the public about issues that concern citizens. So my specialty is human trafficking. I'm the program manager for the Attorney General's office there. And my team also does education on a lot of different things. I have these kind of flyers back on that table. So feel free to take one of these with you. If there's any education here that you think you guys would benefit from, we're happy to come out and provide that for you. So we do education on scams and fraud, elder abuse, human trafficking, opioid and fentanyl, online safety, and e-cigarettes and vaping. And most of our programs, with the exception, I think, of just the elder abuse, we have for parents and adults and also for youth or teens. So we can educate everybody on that. I also have a couple resources back there. I'll go over it real quick. So these booklets are basically going to cover most of what we talk about today, and they're double-sided. So if you flip it over, this blue side is geared for teens to read through. The red side is geared for parents. And so our hope with this brochure is that it will help start those really tough conversations with the youth that you guys support. And then I'm not doing online safety today, but obviously there's a crossover between trafficking and internet. So we also offer these online safety brochures, and they're the same. So parents on this side and teens on this side. So feel free to take those. I have a ton in my car, so if it looks like we're running out, we're not. So with that, we'll get started. I would basically like to ask a couple questions before I start. If you're willing to share, what are you hoping to learn today?
What is it? How do we deal with it?
Okay, so just a basic definition, and what do we do about it? Okay, well, I think I got that covered.
Well, I'm curious if you go to the high schools.
I do. I actually I can't even remember, all the months are running together. I can't believe 23 is almost over. But I did a training for Sholo High School several months ago, and I was able to train their entire freshman academy class. And so that was a few hundred students, 150 students, I think it was. But we do go all over the state, and we are in schools, Maricopa County and then statewide. And we start this training right about 7th grade. Some schools will invite us to teach their 6th graders, and that's kind of on a basis of them deciding, if their students are mature enough to hear about this. But 7th grade is right about where we start. Any other questions before we start? So the objectives today, learn the different types of human trafficking, describe the characteristics of the victims and the traffickers, identify what the risk factors are, as well as what the protective factors are, what helps prevent our kids from becoming vulnerable to this. Identify how traffickers control their victims, and review prevention and reporting strategies. And then obviously we will be talking about topics that include physical and sexual violence. So if you need to take a minute, please feel free to do so. What is human trafficking? So human trafficking involves force, fraud, or coercion. You're going to hear those 3 words a lot today. There are 2 basic types of trafficking, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And we're going to talk about both. Our primary focus is going to be sex trafficking today, but we will touch on labor trafficking. So it is the world's fastest growing criminal enterprise, second only to the drug trade. It is estimated to be $150 billion per year, and that's globally. And it victimizes 25 million people every year.
Is that 25 million just the children that have been taken?
No.
Or are you including families?
So it's all of these statistics, unless it specifically says an age group, is everybody. So youth are not the only people that are trafficked. Adults are trafficked, elderly are trafficked. So labor trafficking. So back in 2000, the federal government created a law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. And this made human trafficking illegal. If you can believe, there was no laws prior to that specified what human trafficking was. So with this law, the definition for labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of labor or services. The components of force, fraud, or coercion have to be there in order for it to be considered trafficking under the law. Sex trafficking is defined the same way. Excuse me, I'm gonna get my water. And it's the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of commercial sex. So what commercial sex is sex in exchange for anything that has value. So we typically think of that as money, right? Like cash money. But it could be food, it could be rent, it could be a place to stay, it could be babysitting, it could be drugs. It's literally anything that has value. Or if the person is under the age of 18. If they are under 18, it is automatically considered trafficking. And I want to say, sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, they're a child prostitute, or they're a child sex worker. There is no such thing as either, because a child cannot consent to commercial sex. So those terms are really harmful to these victims, and that's one thing that we're trying to change with education like this, even with law enforcement, that they need to be referred to as what they are. They're children who are being prostituted. They are not child prostitutes. So these terms that we have already heard a couple times, force, fraud, coercion. So what exactly does that mean? So force, I think we all understand what force means. That is physical violence, it's kidnapping, it's abduction, it's holding somebody, restraining them, holding them against their will. It can be forced substance abuse. So sometimes traffickers will forcibly get their victims involved in drugs so that they have another method of control over them. Fraud is basically lies, right? It's promising them a better life, promising them love, marriage. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to make you famous. Your parents don't understand you, but I understand you, right? I'm going to be the person who takes care of you. Coercion is threats. So we see a lot with trafficking, we see a lot of sextortion or blackmail. And so they'll have maybe images or videos, and they use those to blackmail their victims into continuing to engage in this behavior. Control of children. Sometimes traffickers will intentionally impregnate their victims so that they have another way to control them. Because the victim's not going to leave if her children or his children are in the control of a trafficker, right? And quotas. So a trafficker will set a quota. You have to make so much money every single day or else. And the else could be you can't come home, you can't eat, you don't get drugs if they're an addict, you can't see your children, you're going to get, beat terribly. And so these quotas are another way that they control how much money they're bringing in to the trafficker. So the human trafficking versus smuggling. So a lot of times we hear these terms kind of commingled, but they're very different crimes. Human trafficking centers on exploitation. It's not voluntary. It requires force, fraud, or coercion, which is involved. There's no requirement to cross an international border. You can be trafficked and never leave this room. Persons trafficked are victims, and it's never voluntary. With smuggling centers around transportation. So it's a crime against a border, where trafficking is a crime against a person. It always requires crossing an international border, and most of the time, the persons are complicit in that crime or event. So for example, you may pay somebody, say $5,000 to get you from Mexico to the United States, and they transport you across that border. That's a smuggling crime. But once you get here, maybe that smuggler says, you know what? The price just went up to $10,000. And I have your kids, I have your papers, and you're gonna do this to earn back the rest of the $5,000. And naively, they believe that they can actually earn that money, and they never will earn that money. And now they're a trafficking victim. So they're very different crimes, but sometimes they can kind of be connected to one another. So why Arizona? We have a lot of factors that make our market very enticing to traffickers. Most of the time we have great weather. I am grateful to be here today instead of down in the valley. There's easy movement between the states, right? You can go from Arizona to Mexico, California, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Texas, pretty quickly, with the freeway systems and interstates that we have. And traffickers need that. They need to be able to get in and out of places quickly and easily. We have year-round tourism. We host, last year, we had the trifecta of sporting events. We had Super Bowl and the Waste Management Open. We had Barrett-Jackson. We have spring training. I don't know if we still host NASCAR. Is my laptop off? Hold, please. Oh.
Projector click off.
No, this is on. This is on. Is this plugged in, Kirby? Okay. Boy, you guys might have to look at my little bitty laptop.
They need to increase the state budget.
Say that louder in the microphone.
We're always supporting it. Education, anyway.
I don't know, you guys. Everything's plugged in. We check that.
Yeah, I checked that.
That's good. You check on the wall.
Yeah, everything's plugged in. Okay. So this light goes from,
When it's blue, it's supposed to be on.
I think so, but it's,
Maybe the lamp burned out.
maybe. This feels really hot, but it says hot.
Safety switch.
if it gets too warm, let's try to unplug it and plug it back in. That always works for the computer.
I'm not a technology person.
Maybe just leave it off for a couple minutes to cool off.
All right, we'll try that, and then if that doesn't work, sorry guys, we're gonna have to do the laptop deal. But while we're waiting for technology to catch up, does anybody have any questions so far?
So have you gone to Blue Ridge?
No, is that a high school?
Yes, it's the Pine Top Lakeside High School.
I have not. Mm-mm.
Not yet.
Not yet, but maybe Kirby can help us set that up.
What determines which schools you go to?
Invitations?
Invitation?
Yeah. Yeah. We don't usually knock down doors, you know. This is a tough topic to talk about with kids, and sometimes the teachers don't want to let us do it. So it's pretty much word of mouth. I have found that if people in the community approach the schools, say, hey, we learned about this, it would be great for the kids to hear about it. Most of the time they'll invite us to come.
Are you aware of trafficking in our area?
In Pine Top, not
Pine Top Lakeside Shore.
not specifically, but there are cases all over the state of Arizona. But I'm not familiar with anything specifically here. Yes, sir.
Who are the major players in this? Is it organized crime? Is it
Nope.
Mexican cartel?
Nope. Nope. We're going to talk about that.
So
Yep.
what resources does Arizona offer the victims?
We have tons of resources for victims. It's really difficult to identify victims because, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but they don't typically identify as victims. They've been manipulated into usually relationships with their traffickers, and they know that they're in a bad place, but they don't know that what's happening to them is a actual exploitation crime. And so if they are identified as a victim, there are resources available through various places down in the valley. I don't know what's available up here in this area, but I know the resources in the valley would be able to connect them to the resources that were available here. So let me just tell you quickly. So we were talking about Arizona. In 2017, well, actually now, the average age of youth that are entering into sex trafficking, how old? Take a guess. 13. Yeah, 13, 14. Boys, it's younger. It's about 9. 50% of these trafficking victims are under the age of 16. And approximately 4.9% of all men in Arizona are sex buyers. And 4.9%. Yeah. So in 2021, Arizona ranked 13th in the United States for reported sex trafficking cases. So that doesn't mean that we're 13th in the nation for sex trafficking. It just means that we're 13th for people who have reported it. And it is a significantly underreported crime. But in 2017, we ranked 3rd. And we've dropped from 3rd to 13. And that is wholly due to law enforcement and advocacy agencies who are working really hard to, prevention, awareness, education, and then going after the bad guys.
Treated as criminals, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And it's a thought process, right, that we have to change. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any statistics on what kind of homes the kids live in that are being trafficked, like socioeconomic or single parent or anything like that?
Yes, sort of. We're going to cover that. And if I don't answer your question, you let me know. Do you want to try to plug that in again? And we'll see in the meantime. So a lot of things, one of the most important things that I think I can do in this role is bring awareness to what the myths around trafficking are versus what the actual facts are. Especially when I go into high schools, I always ask the kids, what do you know about trafficking? And it's, oh, I saw on TikTok that, there's people getting kidnapped from Target parking lots, or cars are getting marked, their tires or their handlebars, doorknobs, whatever. It doesn't happen. I'm not gonna say it never happens, but with all the law enforcement connections that I have, none of them have ever been reported to be abducted out of a Target or Walmart parking lot. It just doesn't happen. I think nationally, of trafficked victims in the United States, like 9% were abducted. So 9% is a lot, right? But it's not probably what you thought coming in the room. You probably thought it was a lot higher than that. And there's a couple reasons behind that. So a trafficker doesn't want to draw attention to themselves. This is a low-risk, high-reward crime. And if they're abducting people in broad daylight, or even in dark alleys, it's going to get attention, right? Either somebody's going to see, we have cameras that are going to capture it, they're going to get reported missing, it's going to be on the news, and they don't want that. They want to stay under the radar. Plus, imagine trying to control a person who's being held against their will. The first chance that they get to escape, they're going to try to escape, versus somebody who's been manipulated to believe that they have chosen to be where they are. That person's easier to control, right? Because they have freedom of movement. They can go wherever they want, whenever they want. But they've been brainwashed and manipulated to believe that this is the only place that they can be. So, going back, one of the myths is people being trafficked are physically unable to leave their situations, that they're locked in or held against their will. And that is a myth. So another myth is only women and girls can be trafficked. Men and boys are also trafficked. Globally, men and boys represent nearly half of all trafficking victims. Our LGBTQ youth face higher rates of discrimination, violence, and economic instability, which makes them more at risk. A survey that ASU's research center, they have a sex trafficking research center there, and a survey that they did of 246 homeless youth that were receiving services showed that 21% of the males and 24.5% of the females had a history of sex trafficking victimization. And 38.4% of those homeless youth were LGBTQ youth. So kind of going back to your question, traffickers are looking for vulnerabilities that they can prey on and exploit. And so when you look at runaway youth, what is their biggest vulnerability? They need basic needs. They need food, they need a place to stay. And they don't have money. They probably don't have any marketable skills. They probably can't get a job because they're young. So a trafficker is going to see that and they're going to say, oh, hey, that's really too bad that your parents kicked you out. Man, that's not fair. They're terrible people. You deserve so much better than that. You're such a great person. Why don't you come stay with me? I'll take care of you, right? And they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is the person who cares about me. And it might go on like that for a couple of weeks, where he's developing trust, right? Building a relationship, establishing a bond before that exploitation starts. So who are these traffickers? Oh, hang on. It's harder for me to keep track on these papers. So another myth, we'll go back to that. Trafficking victims do not attend school. So that is a myth. Sometimes trafficking victims are still engaging in the same activities that they always did. Sometimes they're living at home with their parents and their parents have no idea what's happening. I had occasion to meet a lady. If I had to guess, she's probably my age. And she was a survivor of sex trafficking. And she came from a wealthy family, upper class, and she moved around a lot because her dad was like an executive level employee someplace, and he was required to move about every 2 years. So every 2 years she was in a new school. And even though her neighborhoods were really nice, you know, they had a lot of money, they were a very conservative Catholic family. Religion and faith was very important to this family. They had dinner together every night. The mom was a stay-at-home mom. She had siblings. She did very well in school. So you hear all this and you're like, she's fine. This would never happen to her. So she wasn't allowed to date till she was 16, and she followed the rules. And she starts this new school. And this boy at school starts paying attention to her. You know, you look really nice today. Oh, can I carry your books for you? And she really liked that he noticed her. And he asked her out. She said she wasn't allowed to date, and they just became friends. And a couple months into this very platonic friendship, he asked if he could give her a ride home from school. And she thought, well, it's not a date, it's just a ride home from school. That would be okay. So she said, sure. So he drove her home from school, and instead of turning right to her house, he turned left. She said, well, I live that way. And he says, well, I'm gonna go by my house, pick something up, and I'll give you a tour of my house. And he was very rich, richer than her. So she goes, they go inside, he offers her a Coke, she drinks the Coke, and it was drugged. And his cousins were there, and he sexually assaulted her, and his cousins filmed it. And the next day she went home, and she was so ashamed that she didn't tell anybody. And the next day at school, he comes up to her and says, look, I have these photos. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, these are going to your dad's boss, and he's gonna get fired. They're going to your pastor at church, and he's gonna know how dirty you are. And so this is what's gonna happen. And again, she thought she could earn these pictures back. And so every night, she would sneak out of her house, and he would pick her up in front of her house, and he would take her to another house in this wealthy suburban neighborhood where she would take what's called in-calls all night long. And there's doctors and chiropractors and lawyers and politicians and police officers. You know, this isn't, you know, in a back alley someplace with, you know, dirty, gross, druggy people. You know, these are upstanding citizens in a community. And this happened to a girl that you would never think that this kind of thing would happen to. And she never told anybody. And so what are the signs? You know, the signs were she was falling asleep in class. She went from an A student to failing. She wasn't participating in social activities, and, you know, I'm sure her demeanor was very depressive, and they chalked it up to teenage angst. So, you know, it's important for us to recognize, you know, it doesn't mean that every kid that's falling asleep in class is being sex trafficked. But taken in context with all the other cues and things, it definitely warrants a conversation, right? And so when we talk to our high school students and our teens, it's important when we talk to them about this that they don't feel like we're telling them, you're gonna become a victim of this. We approach it with them in a way that's, we need you to pay attention to your peers. Because if you guys see things, we can't see them. We're not with you all the time. And they're more likely to listen if they think that they have a job to protect somebody else than if they think you're telling them, we don't want you to become a victim, because they're thinking they're smarter than that, right? So keep that in mind if you're talking to kids or grandkids or other relatives, that kids this age, they don't ever want to be told that they can potentially do anything wrong, right? And so maybe approaching it in a way of, you know, hey, these are some things, if you see your friends going through this stuff, you need to let somebody know, right? Like it's your job as the person who's kind of in this community of youth to look out for each other. Target victims they don't know. 46% of trafficking victims know who their recruiters are. So like I mentioned earlier, it's a really rare occasion that a victim is abducted into trafficking. 33% of all trafficking victims, it's not last year, 2021, were recruited by a family member or a caregiver. So you might be thinking, why? Like, why would that happen? And sometimes they're just bad people, right? And it's maybe generational abuse that causes that. Sometimes it's out of a need, again, where, you know, hey, we have a multi-generational family living under one roof and we need to pay the rent. And this person said they'd give us money for our, 14-year-old, and this is what we're doing. And they, it sounds crazy to think they don't know better, but sometimes they just don't know better. And again, sometimes they're just bad people doing terrible things. 28% were recruited by an intimate partner. And so obviously the family trafficking and the romantic partner trafficking are what we see the most of. So the average age of a male trafficker is 28 and a half. So when I talk to high schoolers, before I get to the screen, I always ask them, tell me what a trafficker looks like. Who do you think they are? They're really old. They're bald and scary, and they're in, alleys, and it's like, okay, yeah, really old. But I ask them, would you be charmed by that guy? Would you fall in love with that guy? Like, would you let that guy take care of you? No way, no way. He's 28 and a half, and he's handsome, he's charming. He probably has some money that he's flashing around. Female traffickers are younger. 24.4% of traffickers are female. And most of those are what we call the bottom. And what the bottom is a victim who is, and we say in the life, that means they're in the trafficking life. So she's a victim, but she's probably been there the longest with that trafficker, and she's his most trusted victim. And so he puts her in charge. She's in charge of recruiting other victims. She's in charge of teaching them the ropes. She's in charge of discipline. She's in charge of posting the ads. And she's often in charge of the money. And so this creates another level of separation between the victim and the trafficker, right? So we trained a hospital and on trafficking. And one of the emergency nurses, shortly after this training, 2 young ladies came in. One of them was injured, she had a broken nose, and the other one was not. And she was asking what happened, and the other girl was answering. What's your name? Oh, her name is so-and-so. Well, what happened? She fell down the stairs. Okay, well, where do you live? Oh, she lives over here. And so that kind of set off some bells and whistles for this nurse. And so she took all the information and she said, okay, I need to run some tests. You stay here and we're going to go get some x-rays and we're going to come right back. She got this girl away from the other young lady and she said, are you okay? And the girl said, no, I'm not okay. And they were able to get her help. The other girl went back.
So what are the chances she would say, no, I'm not okay?
I was just going to say, that is an unusual situation because they are so afraid. They have been so brainwashed that everybody is out to get you, right? You're the one that's having sex for money. That's a crime to have sex for money. So if you tell somebody, they're going to arrest you, not me. I'm not doing anything wrong, right? So it's really rare that we would have that outcome that we did. But that girl was probably the bottom in this trafficking situation. It is partially answers, where'd she go? Your question about demographics. It's everybody. This doesn't affect one disproportionate race or ethnicity. It's vulnerability. That's what it is. That's the common denominator. 1 in 5 were gang members, so this is a gang-related crime. And some traffickers will use their privilege and their wealth and power, and some of them are the same socioeconomic status as their victims. So there's really no kind of rhyme or reason to that. So of sex traffickers that were arrested, they were asked, what were your recruiting tactics? Nowhere on there does it say abduction. It was friendship, romance. They focused on runaways, offered a place to stay, or they promised them money and wealth. So this is all fraud. So grooming. What is grooming? So grooming is identifying what that vulnerability is. They're going to maybe find somebody who's, and we talk about this in the internet safety presentation, but oversharing online. You know, our kids love to overshare online. And if they're talking about, my parents won't let me do XYZ, they don't understand me. My boyfriend and I just broke up and I'm heartbroken. A trafficker sees that and he's like, all right, now I have my in. And they go digging on the profile. Oh, she loves this band. Oh, she loves these movies. Oh, she plays softball. And so now he's like, okay, this is how I will connect with her. Right? And I say her because it's predominantly girls, but it does happen to boys. And so they're going to identify that vulnerability. Then they're going to ply them with affection, gifts, attention, love. They're going to gain their trust, and then they're going to start to isolate them from friends and family. And then once that isolation is complete, they start the exploitation. So we're going to refer to them as pimps for the next couple screens. A pimp is a violent criminal. Okay, it's been popularized in pop culture, but it is a violent criminal who sells people. So a Romeo pimp is what we call the boyfriend pimp. And we see this a lot. This is the type of pimp who's going to get a young lady to fall in love with him. He's going to give, like, they call it love bombing. And it's a lot of attention in a very short period of time, taking the relationship from 0 to 100 like that. Courtship tactics, I can't live without you. You know, I need to spend all my time with you. You know, you make me so happy. When I'm not with you, you know, I hate myself when I'm not with you. And it's extreme, right? And so these girls feel so loved because maybe that's their vulnerability, is they really haven't had that in their lives. And they can't believe that this person wants to be with them all the time. But that's an isolation tactic, right? So, and then maybe at some point in this relationship, and sometimes it takes a very long time, but they might ask for a favor out of love. Like, hey, I bought you these designer clothes. I got you this nice handbag. I got your nails done. I got your hair done. I spent all this money on you because you deserve to look beautiful. You deserve to feel beautiful. But now I can't pay my rent. And I really don't want to do this because I don't want to share you. But my buddy said he'd give me $500 if you had sex with him. And she doesn't want to do it, but she's afraid of losing him more. So she does it one time. And we know what happens. He records it. And now he's blackmailing her. And now that charm and affection and attention is out the window.
So is this what they're doing, like with a 13-year-old?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So one of the red flags, and we'll talk about this later, but one of the red flags is a young person with a much older boyfriend. You know, that's not something that should be overlooked. One, it's weird. You know, it doesn't mean that they're being trafficked, but it's inappropriate. But it could be a situation like that. And even if it's not yet, it could lead to that later, right? So hopefully this video works. This is this is actually a survivor of sex trafficking. Her name's Rebecca Bender. She was the victim of a Romeo pimp. So I'll let her tell the story, if I can get it to work. Here we go. Oh, I might have to go. Okay, we can do this online, guys. We'll do it this way. Is there a Wi-Fi password?
I'm sorry?
Do you have Wi-Fi?
Yes.
Oh, this might be on.
CPC,
Okay.
wait, somebody else knows it.
CPC Pine Top?
Yeah.
And then,
It should have 1940 exclamation point.
nope. Is it, okay, so there's a CPC Pine Top 5G.
No, wait, no. I'll get the office.
Gosh, we need the Jeopardy music today, don't we?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do most of these people have regular jobs?
No. Why would they?
They don't need it.
They don't need it.
That's how they make their money.
So think about this. If I'm a drug dealer, right, and I have drugs, I have to buy this. I have to go pay for it from somebody else, right? So I'm out of pocket money. And now I have this that I'm going to sell for 5 or 10 times what I bought it from this guy from. And I sell this, but now I have nothing. And I have to go buy more, right? But if I'm trafficking in people, I can manipulate you, which doesn't cost me anything, and I can sell you 20 times in a day. Over and over and over. And so it's high risk, or low risk, high reward.
19, lowercase Pine Top, exclamation point, 40. You all forget that.
I know nothing.
Did it work?
It's thinking, yeah.
So how did the traffickers first get into trafficking?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, can't connect. I'll try this one. It could be a number of ways. It could be, you know, like I said, it's a familial situation. Sometimes it's generational. You know, this is what my parents did, so this is what I'm doing. This happened to me. I don't know any different. It could be out of a need. You know, maybe there's a debt that they have, and they've seen, oh, other people are doing this, and they don't see it as a crime against a person, because that person is a commodity. They're dehumanized. So I don't know if I'm not a psychiatrist, but there's got to be something.
It could even be maybe even a neighborhood thing.
It could be, yeah.
Friends.
Absolutely.
Like a group.
And sometimes it's the buyers, the Johns, who are buying sex, and then they see these other pimps, and they're like, well, that guy's making a ton of money, right? And so then he maybe approaches one of the, you know, girls that's on the blade or on the track in Phoenix, and now he's a trafficker.
You know, in my personal experience here in Navajo County with traffickers and stuff, I've seen one situation where the daughter of a friend of mine, she was 17.
Knock, knock.
Hi.
Hi, puppy. That didn't work.
That didn't work. Okay, hold on. Let me see. Let's try this just a minute.
And, you know, first of all, she's buying the drugs and stuff, but she's a very attractive young lady. And her drug supplier says, well, let me give you a freebie here. Let me give you a freebie here. And then after a while, hey, she's hooked on, she needs this drug. Well, I'll give you something, but you're going to do something for me first. And then you have sex with her. And then, well, next time you want to have sex, you're going to have sex with this guy over here before I give you the drugs. And she's gone now. The other thing is on social media. Social media is horrible. Oh, got her all set up?
Oh, no. Nope.
Oh, okay.
That would be too easy.
Okay, I'm just trying to, the other thing I've seen was a situation where a young man down in the valley who's into sexual.
We're just getting all of your. That's causing to the
Oh, I love you, baby. I want to do all this good stuff for you. I want to marry you. He was underage, he was overage. He came up.
Oh, you know what? I need that. That's my presentation. This connects to the TV.
I gotta turn this on first.
Online.
Sorry, guys.
And she sucked into it because, oh, I don't want my parents.
Password didn't work.
No.
If you can, I gave her 19 pine
Well, she's
top,
putting out all over the whole internet.
exclamation point.
40, 19, no, it's 40 explanation.
That's what I
point.
said.
Okay, hold
No,
on.
you said explanation point 40.
Okay, try this. Go back to your,
With the, you know,
because I must have heard Dusty wrong, because I could have sworn he said exclamation.
Yes,
So
40.
is it the 5G or?
Yes.
Okay. Or this one?
It's the 5G.
Okay.
Okay, and it's 19 Pine Top.
Oh.
40 explanation point.
You reverse the 40 in the
And that's
exclamation.
it? That should work. That was different. We're just breaking out
There you are.
all of the
No,
tools today.
Okay, you're connected.
Thank you.
Okay, because then we'd have to, let's let her use the TV so they don't have to set up the screen.
That's
and
fine.
everything.
That's fine.
Stuart said the problem was, did you buy the HDMI cables? That's because he didn't know, and they didn't have one.
Yeah.
And so you bought it, so that's why it works.
Yeah, because that's when I first came. That's what we used because I use the computer and we do the PowerPoint up on the thing. So
They just find some lonely child who's sitting there at home alone. Right.
So there you go. Does that work?
Thank you, Kirby.
Amen.
I was born and raised in a small town in Southern Oregon, and I was a good kid in school. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got great grades. I was really active in sports, and I even graduated a year early. I was accepted into Oregon State University, and I had my dorm room already assigned, and I was really excited to move up to Corvallis. But that summer I got pregnant by my boyfriend, and I had to make a real tough decision whether I was going to keep my baby and unenroll from university or get an abortion and keep it all a secret. That was a really tough summer for me. After I had the baby, I had some friends that had gone up to U of O to go to college, and they had an extra room in one of their apartments. It was at that time that I met a boy or a guy who pretended to take interest in me. I really thought he liked me, and we got along really well. He was really funny and charming, and he had a nice car, and he always picked up the tab. He had nice clothes. And he told me he was a record producer, that he had a band up in Portland, and that's why he frequently went out of town. There's a saying that says when you take a child by the hand, you take the mother by the heart. And I really think that's what happened for me, because I had this new little girl and this man who showed this desperate attention towards her, like he wanted to really help make this family that I really wanted for my daughter. And he invited me to move in with him after about 6 months of dating, and I was really excited. And I brought him down to Southern Oregon to meet my family, and everything seemed fine until we arrived in Las Vegas. He said we were moving there because that was the entertainment capital of the world, and being a record producer and having a a band, that's where they were going to get the most gigs and the most jobs, and that's where his job was leading him. So I desperately wanted to go with him, to be with him, and to start this family that he promised me. He pulled up to an escort service, and he said, "This is how it works in Vegas. I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I put first and last on an apartment. I filled your fridge up with food. You're gonna need to run that money back." And I felt trapped. I felt like, how am I gonna get out of this? And you didn't know if you were gonna live or die. You didn't know what he was gonna do or what he was capable of, and so it was really scary. I can remember just running through the casino thinking, like, these people don't even have a clue what's going on. They're just, cha-ching, cha-ching, Las Vegas, yay! And they're doing all this stuff, and I'm running for my life. I'm running from a man that has forced me into doing things that I didn't want to do. When you have a trafficker that's waiting at home with their child and says, if you don't bring home $1,500, you're going to find your daughter out on the corner, I think I was probably more frightened to go home than I was to be in the room. Because if you got robbed, it was your fault for being stupid. If you got raped, it was your fault for not watching your back. Anything that happened to you was typically your fault, and you incurred more punishment for allowing those things to happen to you. So it made you always walk in fear of your trafficker. I'm a mother, I'm an author.
Sorry. So that is a
Perfect example on what we've been talking about, right? He saw a vulnerability in Rebecca. The fact that it took 6 months to establish a relationship.
It's a long game. But she wasn't the only one, right? Because she said that's why he was out of town all the time, right? And she actually does a lot of podcasts. She does a lot of speaking engagements, and this is a very small portion of her story. But she belonged to I hate to say family, but a family of victims. I think there were 8 or 10 other girls that lived with her, and they form trauma bonds with one another, right? And I think she tried to leave 3 or 4 times before she was finally successful in leaving. And her story of leaving is actually more severe. She was caught a couple times by him and physically assaulted pretty seriously for it. So, and she's trying to protect this daughter that she has. But, during her trafficking experiences, she was dropping the daughter off at school every day, daycare school, and then she was cooking for the other people in the home. And it just seemed to be like a very normal situation, except that she would put her daughter to bed at night and then she would go out and work. So another type of pimp is what we call the CEO pimp. And hang on, I'm trying to my slide here. So this is the kind of pimp who, and they all see this as a business, but this is the kind of pimp that's going to go after somebody who wants to become famous. So sometimes you'll see ads in coffee shops where youth hang out. And it'll be like, become a model, become a YouTube gamer, whatever they do. Music, acting, whatever it is. And you'll call this number and it all seems legit until it isn't. And they'll maybe try to get you to Las Vegas or Los Angeles. Hey, I know a producer and he wants to cut a demo and I'm going to pay for this because I really believe in you and you can be so famous. And they get them to travel and now they're isolated, right, from the family. So the last type of pimp is a guerrilla pimp. And they'll all eventually become this. So that Romeo pimp that was so good to her and so good to her daughter, and she was so in love with him for months and months, eventually became abusive. And he was using violence and intimidation to keep her under control. And he was also using coercion because he was threatening her daughter. Traffickers will also use brands. They're tattoos, but they're branding their victims. They will use like dollar signs, mottos like trust and loyalty. They're usually someplace pretty visible, on the neck, across the chest. We're seeing them here. Squares, diamonds, crowns, even barcodes. Now that's not to say that if you see somebody with a name across their chest, they're a trafficking victim. But again, we take those with other indicators, right? And that, it's kind of dual purpose. It lets other pimps know that that person is under the control of another trafficker. But it also is meant to serve as a method of control to the victim, to remind them that you are not a human, you are a commodity. And you are under the control of somebody else. So what are the risk factors? Again, this all boils down to vulnerabilities. So what are those? Poor self-esteem, poverty, lacking a strong support system, being homeless or a runaway, family rejection due to LGBTQ+, foster care kids are really vulnerable, and then having previous abuse in your family is also a key risk factor. What was I going to say? The poor self-esteem. So, if a trafficker is approaching a group of young girls, maybe at a mall or at a park or something, he's not going to go after the prettiest one or the one that seems the most confident. He's going to go after the one that's kind of shy and maybe seems like her self-esteem is a little bit lower than the other group of girls because she's the one that he can build up, right? So what are the protective factors? What prevents our kids from becoming vulnerable? Families who create safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. Self-care or even therapy. Stable employment, housing, and having basic needs met. Emotional health and feeling connected to your community, your family, and your faith. Positive friendships and peer networks, and recognizing what the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships are. And we don't get into that with the adult presentation, but we do get into the details of healthy versus unhealthy relationships with the kiddos when we talk to them. So again, this can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter race, age, gender. So this video, I do want to show you. I'm going to have to do some magic here again. And what I want you to kind of pay attention about in this one is I want you to notice what this young lady looks like. I want you to notice where she's at. And I want you to pay attention to the text messages that are being sent back and forth between her and her trafficker. And then in the very beginning, it's a little bit hard to hear, but pay attention to the guy in the car at the beginning and what he's saying.
Hey man. No, I can't make it to the gym tonight. Yeah, another late night at work. Yeah, hopefully Thursday. Alright, bud. Talk to you later.
this guy isn't here yet. Mike doesn't get how awkward it is to wait out here. I mean, how hard is it to tell me the room number? I remember when I met Mike. He told me how beautiful I was. No one ever talked to me like that before. When did he stop doing that? I can't even remember. Man, this place is nice. Maybe I'll just walk around the lobby till the guy gets here.
Hope the smart guy was right. And she was young as she looked at the photo.
Even living with Dad would have been better than this. I could just leave. I could just walk out right now. I'll just be quick. I could just get a taxi. What if Mike is here? What if he sees me? I could just tell him. It won't matter. He'll just teach me another lesson. I wonder if he really meant it about my sister. I mean, I could barely just handle this, but Megan? What do they want with a 12-year-old anyway? Don't cry. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Not much time. You'll walk out of the bathroom very casually and you'll just keep walking. Just walk out the door. How old do you have to be to get a cab? I mean, what if the driver asks for my ID? Everyone wants to see my ID. I don't have an ID. I'm 15. I shouldn't even be here. You can do this. Just be calm.
Press 5 for me, please. Thank you.
I always feel like there's so much to unpack in that video. So in the beginning, you know, that guy is obviously looking for a young girl to buy, right? And then the text messages are pretty clear that her trafficker at one point was her boyfriend. And she says, when did he stop telling me I was so pretty, right? And then we can kind of insinuate how she ended up in this situation, because she says, even living with Dad would have been better than this. So there was some kind of family turmoil that her boyfriend exploited. And the other things that always stand out to me is she doesn't look like what we think somebody who's selling sex looks like, right? She's beautiful. And she's in a very nice hotel. And when she sat down at the bar, there was a red flag. Does anybody know what it was?
Couldn't buy a Coke.
She couldn't buy a Coke. And the bartender said, should I charge this to your room? And she said, oh, I'll just have water, which means she's not staying there. So why is she here? She's 15. So, and then the coercion, right? He's threatening her sister because she says, well, I could just leave. I could just walk out of here. So why doesn't she? Right?
If the bartender had recognized the problem, what could he have done?
What could he have done?
Anyway.
Yeah. He could, you know, and I'll talk about this later. I keep saying that. But we partner with an organization that we created a specialized training for hotels and lodging. And we are training hotels, motels, and casinos all across the state of Arizona. And there's specific indicators for specific jobs, because a bartender is going to see something different than a housekeeper, right? And so when we're doing these trainings, this is exactly what we're teaching them. And so in this situation, had he recognized that as an indicator or a red flag, he could have called the police, he could have called the security at the facility, and they could have called the police. And the police, like, we never, ever, ever intervene in these situations. You know, it's fine to say, are you okay? Because if they say no, we can get them help. But if they say yes, we have to leave it at that. And if you still think there's a problem, you call law enforcement. Because if it's nothing, you don't care, right? If you show up and it turns out to be nothing, then it's nothing. But it can be very dangerous to intervene, yeah. And you know, in that situation, had he done something, maybe they would have been able to notice her coming out of his room and then been able to, you know, get security or local police involved.
Sister is still the concern, yes.
For her.
Right.
Yeah, but in reality, is that trafficker really gonna go get the sister? I mean, probably not, because it's risky. It's risky. He's not gonna go kidnap the sister. But she doesn't know that. Yeah. So going back to the guy in the car, supply and demand. So this is a business like anything else. There's sellers, consumers, and products. And the sellers are the traffickers, the buyers are the Johns, and the products are the people. Increased demand for commercial sex and sexual entertainment, which is strip clubs, pornography online, OnlyFans. I don't know if you've heard of that.
What did you say?
OnlyFans is a website where people sell stuff, like pictures. If you don't want to know, good. We've talked about low risk, high reward. Drugs can be sold in one transaction, but humans are sold over and over and over again. And the buyer views the victim as a dehumanized product for immediate consumption and disposal. So, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do with this education too is reach the buyers, you know, and let them know, like, this is, you're contributing to this by creating a demand for it. And I heard a gentleman speak at an event, and he was basically, his focus of training is on the sex buyers, it's on the men. And he said something I will never forget. He said to these men, you are paying for the illusion of consent. Because if you walk into a room with a person, whether they're a youth or an adult, and you say, do you want to do this? Are they going to tell you no? Because then they're not going to make their quota and they're going to get beat up. So they're going to say, yeah, I want to do this. Like, come on, give me the money, let's go.
All the buyers think it's okay.
Because they want to think it's okay. It's easy. This is a business transaction, right? It's an illusion of consent. Because if she says, no, I don't want to do this, and I make her do that, I'm a rapist. But if I ask her, do you want to do this? And she says yes, and I give her money, that's consensual. So what are the barriers to reporting? Because we've already talked about how underreported this is, how difficult it is for victims to come forward. So the barriers, 58% of victims said they didn't come forward because they felt shame, because of what they were forced to do. They were ashamed. They didn't identify as a victim. 54% had little to no social support. So they feel like, hey, at least here, I know what to expect. My basic needs are met. But if I leave, I have nothing and nobody. So what happens to me? 47% lack of knowledge about resources that are available. 46% have a criminal history. They've probably been arrested for prostitution. They're probably committing other crimes for their trafficker, whether it's like theft from CVS or, theft of credit cards. 46% lack of knowledge about victims' rights. So that's another benefit of trainings like this in the community, is just to get that word out that there's resources. So what are some warning signs? If you suspect that somebody may be a victim of trafficking, bruises or fractures, especially if they're at various stages of healing, right? Because that signifies ongoing abuse. Inappropriately dressed. And what I mean by that is if it's really cold outside and they don't have enough clothing on, or if it's really hot outside. If you're in the valley in August and it's 118 and you're wearing a sweatshirt and long baggy pants,
That's high school.
I was gonna say, you're either a teenager, but again, with other indicators and red flags, they could be hiding other signs of abuse. And then of course, inappropriately dressed, meaning you have young girls with lingerie in their drawers or in their suitcases or whatever. Withdrawn behavior, and then unusual tattoos or branding. Talking of an older boyfriend or girlfriend, possessing new material items that you know they can't afford, unable to socialize and maintain interpersonal relationships. Maybe they don't have their own identification documents. So if somebody's 16, 17, 18, and they don't have their driver's license, it's likely their trafficker has it. And they feel that's another way that they control them. Like, what are you gonna do? Where are you gonna go? You don't have any ID, you can't get a plane, you can't take public transportation like across country, you can't get a job. And then references to sex trafficking terminology, which is daddy, trick, hustle, date. Another warning sign that I didn't put on here is if you have a teen or really anybody who has a phone that they feel like they can't ever not answer it. So a lot of times when we talk to teachers, we'll tell them, if you're talking to a student and their phone rings and you say, no, you're not getting that, put it away. No, I have to get this. You don't understand. I have to answer this. That's a red flag. So where are the traffickers finding victims? In 2020, there was a 125% increase in reports of recruitment on Facebook. 95% on Instagram, and 76% of transactions for sex with minors start online. So like Kirby said, they're, and when you do these like police operations, and they're kind of watching these predator screens, they have all these windows open. And they're chatting with multiple kids all at the same time, and they're looking for that one that isn't going to block them. They're looking for that one that's gonna go, hi. And then they're like, all right, I'm in. And then they're gonna start that grooming process.
So I'm assuming the police are on social media looking for this.
Well, yeah, they are, but when you think about how vast the internet is and how limited our police resources are, it's like, they're like cockroaches. You catch one and 10 more pop up. We are actively working, but sometimes it feels like there's just never enough.
You have a task force group or something, right?
Yeah, most agencies have their own, yeah. So online, 1 in 5 youth will be sexually solicited. And what that means is somebody asking them to engage in either sexual talk or to send sexual photos. 1 in 33 received an aggressive sexual solicitation, and that means it's offline. So the phone, could be the mail, could be in person. And then 1 in 4 received unwanted exposure to sexual material, and that is receiving photos. And 1 in 17 were threatened or harassed.
What is the age group of youth you're using here?
It would be under 18, yeah. And so where else are they finding victims? We have a school down in the valley that's close by my office, and it is known that traffickers they know the school schedule. So they know early release days, they know days off, they know, sports schedules, and they hang out. If school's out at 1 o'clock, they're there at 12:45. And they're just waiting for girls, and they'll befriend them and talk to them. And that's happening right in downtown Phoenix. Parties, parks, malls, libraries, shelters, juvenile detention centers, and group homes.
So what does that mean, juvenile detention center?
So a lot of times, other juveniles that have been trafficked will recruit other kids. So say you have a juvenile who's been arrested for maybe prostitution or maybe theft crimes or assault crimes, disorderly conduct crimes, and they're in the juvenile justice system. So maybe they're in a detention center. They will recruit other kids that are in that juvenile detention center. And that's a really vulnerable population. So protecting teens online, set up parental controls, make sure that your teens understand the dangers of talking to anyone face-to-face, make sure their social media is set to private, and if they receive any harassing messages, save them and call 911. So how can you guys help? Discuss what being taken advantage of looks like. And this doesn't have to be a human trafficking related conversation. It can just be general relationship talk, right? Like, do you know what it means if somebody's trying to take advantage of you? Build self-esteem in youth. Talk about the characteristics of healthy relationships. Foster an environment of acceptance and support for youth who identify as LGBTQ, and reassure the youth in your life that you are a safe space. Learn and understand what human trafficking is, which is what you're doing today. Talk to your teens openly and honestly about human trafficking, and don't perpetuate social media myths. Know the people that your teens are talking to, know who their friends are, and encourage them to come to you for help, or let them know that it's okay if they don't want to come to you, as long as they have a askable adult or a trusted adult that they can speak to, that's okay. So if you suspect trafficking, what do you do, right? So Arizona, and I think we're the only state in the country that has its own dedicated human trafficking hotline. We launched this in February, and it is run by DPS, Department of Public Safety, and ASU STIR, which is Arizona State University's Sexual Trafficking Intervention Research Center. So when you call this number, DPS or law enforcement will answer, but they will ask, do you want law enforcement or do you want services? Because not every victim or survivor wants the police involved. And so if they don't want to talk to police, they are immediately transferred to ASU STIR. And that advocacy agency will get them whatever resources they need. If they need a sober living home, if they need housing, counseling, therapy, whatever they need, they will get it 24/7. Call 911 if you see something that is immediate danger. If you see something, say something, and never intervene yourself. So this is my office. We do have dedicated prosecutors and special investigators that work on these crimes. We tend to focus on the financial aspect of these crimes, so money laundering and things like that that are associated with trafficking. We work in partnership with agencies around the state. So this guy, guess how old he is? 28. He fits right in our wheelhouse. So he was trafficking. He picked up a girl, 16-year-old girl, here in Phoenix, or down in Phoenix. He trafficked her for 6 months out of a hotel room. Phoenix's Human Trafficking Exploitation Task Force rescued her out of the hotel room. We prosecuted him in connection with the other police agencies, and he got 108 years. I think that he was convicted of 11 different felonies associated with that one event.
So
how did they find him?
Yeah, how did they rescue the girl and arrest him? And
Yeah, there were tips that had come in, and so the Phoenix Heat Unit, which is Human Exploitation and Trafficking, and they worked investigatively on this, and then they came in and they got her. If it's a minor, we can do that. We can go get them if we get tips. If it's an adult, we can't, because an adult has a right to not be a victim if they don't want to be. So we cannot rescue them.
So would that case be somebody, a relative, or?
No, he was just a guy who befriended her off of, I think she was a runaway. Yeah. Safe Action Project is the organization I was talking about that we partnered with to create the hotel and lodging trainings. And we do that all over the state. So if you're, have any connections with hotels or any tourism industries like that, we're happy to provide those trainings for free. We've also partnered with Intertribal Council of Arizona, and I've worked in connection with them to develop a specific curriculum for tribal communities. And we are launching that in January. Kirby's excited about that. So if you have any connections with any tribes in the community or tribal members or tribal leaders, it's a Train the Trainer program. So we are training tribal members to be the presenters. So we will train them to become subject matter experts, and they will do what I do, but in their own communities to their own people. So we're really excited about that. We've been working hard on that. So these are some resources. If you guys, I don't have a printout, but if you can take a picture of it with your phones if you want to, or I can email them and you can share them. They're not. I don't think so. But I'm happy to email them and she can share them with you.
Rachelle,
yeah.
If you email it to me, if you have my email, I'll put it on the church's website and I'll have handouts available.
Perfect. And I'll put the human trafficking phone number on there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So does anybody have any questions that we haven't already answered? They are in this book. Sorry. There's a lot of them. But the Arizona Human Trafficking Hotline isn't in here because these books were printed before we launched it. But I'll get that to you. Yes, ma'am.
See something, say something. I've seen things on Facebook about hand signals you may see.
That's a myth.
Okay.
As a law enforcement officer, if I'm in a store and I make some weird hand signal, are you going to know what it means? Right. It's impossible to train every law enforcement agency in the whole country on learning what certain hand signals mean. So that is a complete myth.
Okay. Are there any things like that? Okay.
Outside of, if you see kind of like girls who maybe look like their eyes are always down, they're not looking at their partner. Maybe their boyfriend is much older than they are. Maybe they're made to be looking like they're older than they are. Maybe they are dressed a lot less nice than their partner. Like he has really nice clothing and she's not wearing nice clothing. So, yeah.
What they're meaning there when they say see something, say something is not that you see some kind of secret signal. It's that you see something suspicious. It might be related to, you might see a young girl who keeps going to a motel, like in the afternoon after school, or something. That doesn't look right. Or an older guy picking her up in a car, or maybe dragging her along and say, oh, well, you know, he's too young to be dad, but too old to be boyfriend. Something like that. You know, you see, and it can also,
red
you know,
flags.
it means not only just a human trafficker, but you see something suspicious, you see somebody lurking in the dark shadows, you want to pick up the phone and call. And like she said, as law enforcement, we want to come. You know, we're not going to say, oh, that was so silly, they called us for this because it's nothing. You know, I would rather go to something that turns out that, oh, it was just an innocent, you know, thing. It's not a, you know, we got a call one time of somebody throwing a body off the bridge at Lone Pine Dam. Oh my gosh, you know, and we rush out there. Well, some kids from Sholo High School that are doing their film project and they're filming all this stuff for their deal. Okay, well, I would rather go to that than actually have a body be thrown off over there and nobody called it in. So, you see something, say something. If it's suspicious, whatever it might be regarding, give us a call.
And I would add to that, you know, a lot of times there's a lot of movement, right? So if you see something right now and he shows up or his law enforcement partners show up, maybe it's gone. Maybe they've left. So if you do see something, make note of everything you can. The physical description of the people, if there's a vehicle involved, get all the details about the vehicle that you can, the location, if it's a motel, what room number is it? If, I mean, safely, like we don't want you following them around, but as much information as you can, because if there is some kind of movement or something, the more information that they have to follow up on it, the better off it's going to be. Yes?
How much training does law enforcement go to? I mean, do all agencies participate in programs to learn this?
Human trafficking is like, we go through a lot of training. There's a certain number of hours we have to do. You know, we have to get like 460 hours of training to even become a law enforcement officer, and this is a part of what we train in. And then every year we undergo additional training. I just came back, and Rachelle and I both went to a deal down Maricopa Monday and Tuesday, where there were over 300 law enforcement, court, and victim services people at a human trafficking summit, where we learned what other agencies are doing. We learned what resources are available. We learned about how to go out and enforce and how to protect. And a big deal of the thing is that I learned this week is it's not just about going and arresting the bad guys, but what about the victims? You know, we have to have resources for those victims to protect them, because it's not easy to get out of that. You know, they may be there under this guy's care and servitude because they haven't got any other place to go. Where are we going to put them? So we do get ongoing training, and I'm really excited to be able to be a part of this with Rachelle right now. And I'm, you know, we're going to take and be educating the public as much as we can about it.
So are the buyers getting arrested?
Yes. So you're not going to like this. It is a misdemeanor to buy sex. Yeah. And it is, so the laws or ordinances are done by each city. So there is no state law for prostitution or solicitation. So each city gets to decide how they prosecute solicitation or prostitution. So this is something you guys can do with your legislators and, you know, talking to them about penalties for sex buyers. Phoenix is one of the hardest on sex buyers. They will tow your car and impound it for 6 months. I think it's 6 months. So yes, it's a misdemeanor. You're probably not going to do jail time, but you got to explain to your wife why your car's gone. And if that's a deterrent, great. Personally, I think, you know, maybe like a 3 strikes out, and then it's a felony. But we really don't have anything like that. So
Like there ought to be a state law.
there ought to be. You should work on that. It comes up legislatively, but that's other people. All we can do is bring it to the table, right? But yeah, the louder that those voices are in the legislature, the more that's going to get done.
Which is a big part of us being here
Yeah.
and educating you and other people, because, everybody here's mouth just went down like that and said, misdemeanor? Well, if more people know it and talk to their legislator about it, says, we want to pound these guys, let's make this a felony, then maybe the legislature will listen if there's enough people complaining about it.
And I think starting off, and this is my opinion, but they probably would be more likely to hear a scenario where it's like misdemeanor, misdemeanor, misdemeanor. Okay, now it's felony, right? Like the fourth time it's felony. We're not going to just charge it right away as a felony. Maybe someday we'll get there, but that's my 2 cents.
Although it can be a felony if it is with a minor.
It is a felony,
Yeah,
yes.
It is. Yeah, if it's a
I
minor, it's going
apologize.
to be a
I
felony.
misunderstood you.
And in Navajo County, we hit them really hard. Anything that, sexual abuse of a minor or whatever is going to take in somebody some jail time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are state laws for child sex crimes. Yeah. So what I was talking about was in reference to adult prostitution.
Most of the victims get out of it.
Intervention is about the only hope they have if they have somebody that cares enough and offer them a lifeline.
So if we're talking about minors, yeah, it's intervention. It's somebody who sees something and says something, and because again, if there's a confirmed or a suspected case of a minor being exploited, law enforcement they will respond to that. 100% will respond to that. And if it's confirmed, they will remove that child from that environment. But again, with adults, it's trickier. Because you think about it like domestic violence, right? If you know your neighbor is a victim of domestic violence, and maybe they call the cops one time and that guy spends a night in jail, but then you see her back again the next day, you're frustrated and you're sad and your heart hurts for her, but she's deciding to not be a victim. And unfortunately, as adults, we have that right. And with sex trafficking victims, it's the same. That manipulative, and a lot of times they're in love, genuinely. And so they have to be ready to leave the situation and ask for help. Yeah.
There was a lot of TV play when the Super Bowl was on about trafficking.
Yes, ma'am.
But generally, there aren't public service announcements about it.
Yeah, so ads like that cost a lot of money.
Yep.
And they're paid for with grants, usually. Because, if DHS, Department of Human Services, thank you, Department of Human Services, they have the Blue campaign, which is their anti-human trafficking campaign. They may not have funding to do like a big push like that, but maybe they get a grant surrounding the Super Bowl to draw attention to that. So unfortunately, it almost always comes down to funding. But having the Super Bowl here was an excellent opportunity for us to highlight the excellent work that we're doing here. Yeah.
The other thing is, recently there was a man caught in Holbrook that was going from California probably to New Mexico, but I'm wondering, are there state-to-state connections, the law enforcement?
Yeah, I-40, any interstate is a primary place for people to be, transporting trafficking victims and stuff. One of my jobs is with the sheriff's office. I also do sex offender registration and verification and going out and checking on those guys and stuff like that. One of my registered sex offenders. There's a woman who was arrested a number of times for prostitution in California and Nevada, and she was arrested at a truck stop, not in Navajo County, but arrested at a truck stop with 3 teenage runaways that she was selling to the truck drivers, along with methamphetamine. And, you know, it's just one of the things that they do. They go up and down those, you know, the I-40 and transporting. The guy that was, you're thinking about, there was a deal, one of our deputies arrested a guy that was transporting a young man that was in his human trafficking situation.
So one more thing I want to mention to you all, and this still has this sourita. So I know, ignore that, y'all. Attorney General Mays, Chris Mays, she will actually be here in Show Low on October 3rd. She wants to meet with the community. She wants to hear about what you guys think about the Kroger-Albertsons merger. So maybe do some research on that. And if you'd like to meet her, if you'd like to give your 2 cents about this, she'll be at the Show Low Town Hall.
I don't know.
We don't know.
Rita, that's not Tucson, right?
I'll look. Hang on.
Yeah, she sent me that flyer the other day, put out there, and then I just looked at it yesterday. Whoa, wait a minute now.
I sent you the new one yesterday, too.
Show Low City Council Chambers.
Oh, it's on the flyer. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, okay, cool.
So, yeah, the flyers are in the back with this information on it. That's correct. So, yeah, if you'd like to show up to that and meet her, she'll be there. But other than that, any other questions? Yes.
We've been traveling a fair amount lately, and in the Northwest, in bathrooms, especially probably gas station bathrooms, you know, you've always seen posters on domestic violence, you know, say something, but they've changed their whole demeanor up there, and it's a lot about sex trafficking. And it's kind of like, whoa, does that work sometimes?
Yeah.
Once in a while?
I've seen it in Sky Harbor.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Sky Harbor.
And in bathrooms, you know, stop at a gas station
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And I saw a lot of it, but I saw a lot of it in the Northwest.
Yeah.
More than down
So next
here.
time you look at it, try to notice who it is. It probably says Blue Campaign, and that's DHS, Department of Homeland Security, not Human Services, Homeland Security.
I didn't pay attention to that.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, these are different, you know, they've always had the domestic violence.
Yep.
But this was different, definitely sex trafficking.
What's interesting is we've only been collecting statistics and data on domestic violence for 50 years, if you can believe that. It's only been 50 years. We've only been collecting data and statistics on human trafficking since 2000. And so that seems like a long time because it's 23 years, but there's so little data and information, and we feel like we know so much about domestic violence, and now we're seeing that there's such a crossover between the two, and what wasn't previously recognized as human trafficking or sex trafficking, law enforcement is starting to recognize. Like this woman that Kirby was talking about that's trafficking girls out of the truck stops, she was probably victimized herself. And now she's victimizing other girls. So we're just now kind of learning about these things, right? But thank you for being patient with all of the technical difficulties. You guys were great.
Thanks for being here.